Hi, I'm Jack Trammell, professor at Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland, and I'm always thinking about this question: when does a difference really make a difference? So, when does a difference really make a difference? Is male pattern balding a disability? Does being exceptionally tall leave you open to discrimination or stigma? Does being smart carry social penalties? There are lots of examples that seem very minor, but a case can be made that if they result in social penalties, even some arguably very small differences do actually matter. In fact, some differences clearly matter more than others, and it inevitably leads to a larger question about how we deal with difference. For this podcast, I'm going to focus more on disability than other differences because it's a topic I know a little bit about. There are all kinds of ways to think about disabilities: medical versus psychological, invisible versus visible, mobility versus cognitive, disease related versus accident related, age related versus developmental, and the list goes on and on. But usually, when we talk about, quote, disability, we assume that the difference involved has an important impact on life, and that means it does matter. Since I'm a little thin on top of the head, you might say metaphorically, I might argue that it's a difference that doesn't really make a difference. And it's not a disability, of course. Um, it's not why I'm wearing a hat. I'm on winter break. But on the other hand, if I were trying to compete in an arena with younger people, or if I were involved in midlife courtship, or if I were appearing in the news or in social media in a visual medium, I might think about it differently. I might think about it more carefully. This back and forth over something as seemingly minor as male pattern baldness is actually an illustration of how disability scholars crippe something in quotation marks. They ask important questions about difference. Cripping, in quotation marks, in disability terms, is taking something that appears to be ordinary or even, quote, normal, and exposing how it is actually quite complex and shaped by myriad human differences. A metaphor might be this: take some ordinary thing in a given content area and think of it as Lego, and take all of the Lego pieces apart, and then see what new things you can put together with the same pieces of Lego. What that usually results in are new ways of seeing difference. In my disability classes, especially, I always ask my students to think about this question from the very beginning of the semester: when does a difference make a difference? And after every class, I try to remind them to be reflecting upon that. I suggest that their understanding of this is evolutionary. It's going to change throughout the semester, and it will probably change throughout their liberal arts education and into life as they experience disability, as we all will if we live long enough. And we have difference in our curriculum too. We have difference everywhere in our curriculum already. We have disability everywhere in it too. Douglas Bainton, famous disability historian, boldly claims that disability is everywhere if you only bother to look for it. Disability is everywhere in history. Everywhere. Everywhere. So, a quick message from our sponsor, the Disability Rights Movement, about the term cripping. The term, the word cripple is actually a pejorative term that is not appropriate to use when describing people with disabilities anymore. And the etymology of the word cripple has a really interesting but often kind of tragic storyline to it over the centuries. So, why are we cripping stuff? Well, part of the power of the disability rights movement has been its ability to take language that was negative and twist it into its own positive purposes. So, in this presentation, I don't want anybody to mistake the word cripple as being a nice word or a good word. It is a pejorative word. But as we crip things, we are using that word respectfully to be critical. and to turn language inside out and to use it to a more positive end. So one of the easiest ways to crippe the classroom is to pursue and recognize interdisciplinarity, and disability as a form of difference is really lends itself well to this. In graduate school, I jumped down a rabbit hole and had a whole section of my dissertation on disability in the ancient world, and ultimately about 95% of it got cut out of my final dissertation because it wasn't about disability in the ancient world. It was about disability in college students. But it's an illustration of how you can just jump across disciplines, and disability really is everywhere. When I helped start the human services major on main campus a few years ago, one of the first things I realized was how interdisciplinary human services was, and the positionality of disability in human services revealed countless vantage points that I hadn't appreciated before, ranging from how people with disabilities access services with the complications of disability to perceptions that people in healthcare have about people with disabilities. I truly believe and think that the liberal arts experience itself lends itself very well to dealing with difference, disability just being one example. I think that interdisciplinary approach is kind of built into what we do, even if we do have silos we live in part of the time, and that may be inevitable. But crippe in the classroom challenges us to get outside of that. So, number one, disability is everywhere when you start looking. So, start looking for difference in your classroom. Everywhere. Number two, remember that dealing with difference or disability can be difficult, so be ready for that. It should be difficult. It raises important questions that are difficult. Third, make sure that no matter what discipline you're in or what content you're dealing with, that you always have in the back of your mind an appreciation or idea about the power of language. My favorite philosopher, Richard Carney, does a great job of explaining how language permeates everything we do, regardless of our discipline. A fourth way to crippe the classroom is to pay attention to our students' individual experiences. We have an amazingly diverse and interesting student body, and if we fail to bring that diversity of thinking and experience into the classroom, we miss a chance to crippe the classroom. Fifth and finally, I always have to remind myself to get out of my silos. Disability studies and difference are very interdisciplinary. And so my colleagues outside of my disciplines have been immensely valuable in helping me crippe my classroom. And so I would encourage you to interact with your colleagues too. So in conclusion, differences that really make a difference exist in all of our classes, all across the curriculum. And so I hope this webinar podcast will inspire you to look and dig a little deeper, and hopefully maybe even consider participating in the social justice teach-in. Take care.